In this video, we will examine CSS box model properties on HTML elements directly in the web browser. If you are learning along with the Abby's Door Web Dev 1 curriculum, you can follow with the review page from Unit 5, the box model. The box model is a concept for how an HTML element is rendered on a web page. The important thing to take away from this video is that every element is a box. This web page you see on my screen has lots of elements on it. Some are obviously boxes, some are not so obvious, but the box is still there. The obvious boxes on your web page are most likely block level elements. By default, block level elements have a width 100% of their container, and all of the box model CSS properties are available to them. You can see the box model representation of any element using the browser's element inspector. I'm going to inspect this header. It's a pretty obvious box, so I'll right click and inspect. Now, mine highlighted the header in the HTML inspector. If yours drilled down too far, that's okay. Just click on the header tag. Now in the CSS pane, you can see there are some properties and a diagram. The basic box model CSS properties are width, height, padding, border, and margin. These represent the parts of the box. The width and height are the dimensions of the box. In this example, we've got a width of 576 pixels and a height of 210-ish. Those were not actually specified in the CSS. A block level element is automatically as wide as its container, and the height fits the content. We also have a border. It's currently 4 pixels thick. And then there's some transparent space. The padding is the transparent space between the content and the border. Here, when I'm highlighting it in green in the inspector, it highlights a similar green area on the web page itself, right in the element where the padding goes. So as I change, you can see where the highlight changes in the page. So you know exactly where the padding is at between the content and the border. The margin is on the outside of the border, between the element and other elements. This model is shown in the CSS pane because CSS is the language we use to adjust these values. They impact the way the content is displayed without changing the content itself, so it makes sense for CSS to be responsible for these styles. Let's go ahead and change the padding of this box. Here it is at 5 pixels specified in the CSS, and I'm just going to use the up arrow on my keyboard to increment that value 1 pixel at a time until it's about how I like it. 10 pixels of padding looks pretty good to me. I can also use my down arrow to decrement it if I went too far, but I'm going back up to 10. I liked it at 10. Not only did the web page itself update, but the diagram over here updated too. Now if I wanted to save this, I would have to make sure I am looking at the actual file and saving the code file. But for now, I'm just adjusting how it looks in the browser to see how it would render. Let's also play with the margin. Notice this margin property has 2 values. The first value governs the top and the bottom of the margin, and the second value is the left and the right. So at 5 pixels, I'm going to go ahead and increase that value. So I make sure my cursor is over the 5 pixels, and I go back to my keyboard and use that up arrow again. Now I'm increasing the space outside of the border, just above and below. The white space is increasing. I'm going to crank this all the way up to 30. There's nice extra space now above and below this header. Okay, now let's look at a not so obvious box. These green words here use code tags. So when I inspect over here in the inspector pane, the elements show me this is a code tag around the word width. Code tag is an inline element. Remember when I mentioned block level elements? Here's a quick comparison. Where block level elements are 100% as wide as their container, inline elements are only big enough to fit their inner content. Where block level elements have access to all the basic box model properties, inline elements may not let those properties behave as you'd expect, or in a consistent way. This code tag is only big enough to fit the word width and doesn't allow me to do everything in the box model. We can try. I'm going to try to apply a width of 500 pixels. That would be pretty big. We would notice a lot more white space, but it didn't do anything. Maybe I can apply a margin. There's no margin on it at the moment, but if I apply a 20 pixel margin, you can see now that there's more white space where that margin should be on the left and the right. However, if I highlight it here in the inspector, and you look at where it highlights it on the web page, it only applied it to the left and the right. I expected that margin all the way around, but it didn't do it. It only worked on the left and right. These are some of the limitations of box model properties on inline elements. If you really need access to all the box model properties on an inline element, you can try using display property set to inline block. This sort of gives you the best of both styles. You get all of the box model properties, but the element is still in line with the text around it. So now it really is 500 pixels wide, as you can see when I highlight. And when I highlight the margin, you can see it is now all the way around the element. There's more to the display property, but this is an introductory video, so we'll save the full discussion of the display property for another time. For now, we'll take some time to examine some other websites. Go ahead and inspect elements on any website you like to look at their box model diagrams, and use the CSS pane to adjust those box model properties. Happy coding!